First question comes from Marcia Kramer, WCBS TV. Marcia, you are unmuted.
Yes, my question to you is this. Do you think that there was any problems in terms of the integrity of the prosecutors who were involved? Some of them, including Mr. Kim, had prior investigations of people in the Cuomo administration and even the governor himself. Do you think that that prejudiced him, or was the governor given a fair hearing when he was questioned by him?
Let me answer the first part of that question, and then I'll let Ms. Glavin answer the second part of this question. Look, I've known Mr. Kim for a pretty long time, and I'm loath to criticize people I know who are very highly regarded members of the bar. But you are correct that Mr. Kim was involved in his last position in the Southern District of New York U.S. Attorney's Office in 2 grand jury investigations that involved the Cuomo administration. And in one of those investigations, he personally interviewed the governor. I wasn't at those interviews. I was in my old job as the U.S. Attorney in New Jersey at the time. And so I don't know exactly what transpired in that interview. And then the governor has relayed that he complained about the assistant U.S. Attorney and the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District to the White House at some point. I obviously was not part of that conversation either, but the governor does have concerns, very serious concerns, about whether Mr. Kim was the independent investigator that the Attorney General promised she would appoint in this matter. But Ms. Glavin may have additional thoughts.
Marcia, I actually think the best way for you to think about this, about the appointment of Mr. Kim to investigate sexual harassment allegations against Governor Cuomo, is for me to give you an analogy to Mr. Fishman. As you all probably know, Paul Fishman was the U.S. Attorney in New Jersey who had a long-standing investigation of Governor Christie and Bridgegate. What do you think would be the propriety if now fast forward 5-6 years later, Governor Christie was accused of sexual harassment allegations, of appointing Paul Fishman to be the one to do that? Does that lend to you a feeling that it would be truly independent fact-finding? The best I can tell you on this point is that Mr. Kim was part of an investigation of the governor and people around him for a number of years about the closing of the Moreland Commission. And then certainly with respect to the prosecution of Joe Percoco. And there's no question in my mind that he formed impressions about how the chamber was run. And you can look for yourself at some of the comments that Mr. Kim and Mr. Barara, his boss, Mr. Kim was the number 2, made about Governor Cuomo and how things were run in Albany during that time. So you look at that, and then I can't, as the governor's counsel, I can't ignore how the investigation was conducted. I think that different lawyers may have done some things differently. And I'll leave it at that.
Your next question comes from Jimmy Vilkind of the Wall Street Journal. Mr. Vilkind, your line is now open. Please unmute your microphone.
Hi, a woman identified as Trooper Number 1 alleges that the governor ran his finger down her spine and said, "Hey, you." And in another instance, he touched her stomach from her belly button over to the portion of her hip where she carries her gun. Do any of you have any response to those allegations? I haven't seen any in any of your written materials or statements thus far.
I want to mention 2 things about that. The first is that the governor will address that allegation himself, and so I will let him speak for himself when he
When
does.
will he do that?
I can't give you a timeline, but I know he wants to do it soon. But there is something I want to point out. The report suggested that the governor singled her out, and wanted her on the detail because of some improper motive. That's the clear suggestion in the report. And what the governor told the investigators in his testimony is that he had been complaining about the lack of diversity on his detail for some period of time. He has about 60 troopers that are on the detail. There's only a handful of women. And for a governor who has hired and has senior women in all of his top jobs, this had bothered him for some period of time, and he voiced it. And as the governor relayed it to the investigators, he had met this trooper. He thought she was impressive in their meeting. And he said, I don't understand. Like, why can't we hire somebody like her? Do you know her? And he was told she was excellent. So why don't we
Ms.
hire
Glavin,
her?
can you explain what led the governor, based on an interaction at an event, to believe that she was impressive?
He liked how she maintained eye contact. He liked that she was assertive with him in the conversation. And then he asked one of the troopers he knows about her, and they said, yeah, she's excellent. And he's like, I don't understand this. Why do I not have women on my detail? There's also a suggestion that the governor went and wanted to change whatever the qualifications were. The governor had said he did not do this. I don't know what happened, within the detail, but and within the troopers and what their internal policies are. And actually the governor told the investigators he did not know. But he certainly, if he meets someone, particularly in the trooper world, and he wants diversity, and he has said that to them, that he wants that. So I did want to make that point because he made that in his testimony, and it certainly was not reflected in how the investigators chose to report that.
Your next question comes from Michael Gormley, Newsday. Mr. Gormley, your line is now open. Please unmute your microphone.
Yes, you mentioned that the questioning and what they didn't include has been a problem. Is there anything? How do you know if you don't have this record? Also, is there anything you can say to back that up? The concerns about the questioning and what they didn't include. And then one last question: have you investigated whether these civil charges would be a new standard for impeachment in New York, and if it meets the standard or creates a new standard?
Paul, I think you can probably address your experience having represented a number of chamber employees with how the interviews were conducted.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say in response to your question is, between Mitra's and my law firms, we probably represented 18 or 20 individuals who were interviewed by members of the Attorney General's investigative team, and what I would say is the one thing I say is a number of those individuals left those interviews feeling as if the questions were framed in a way to push them to particular conclusions about people, about the work environment and so forth, that some of the questioning was not sufficiently open-ended in a type of investigation that would be looking for whatever information people had to provide. But I think the truth is, not having seen any of the transcripts, and given the Attorney General's investigators' direction to everyone that they were not to disclose to anyone else what they had testified about, honestly, I think that the best way for you to see that, the best way for us to see that, is to get the transcripts and see how those interviews were conducted. I think they certainly were all transcribed, and I gather that most or all of them were also videotaped.
Actually, I want to speak to that point, Paul. there were 179 interviews conducted. That's what is reflected in their report. But what they also noted, that only 41 of them were done under oath. What I understand that to mean, and again, ask the Attorney General investigators here, is that the vast majority of the interviews were not transcribed. That people came in and did what they call informal interviews, where there's no court reporter taking down the questions and the answers. And all you have from those interviews would be the investigators taking notes and writing up a memo of what was said. What I have been told is that a lot of interviews of current and former chamber employees were done informally. So we don't have the Q&As that we do for the 41 under oath. And again, I'm sure the investigators will correct me if I'm wrong, but that there was a number of interviews, including the one where this lawyer called me, that the two lead investigators didn't even attend, Mr. Kim and Ms. Clark. They had underlings do it. And I think this begs the question of what they chose to put in the memos, which I assume they did and did not, and whether we're going to get an accurate recitation versus having done all of the interviews with a court reporter there in a Q&A. I am also
Yeah, but they had
aware.
attorneys, right? They had attorneys
It's what?
present. Were objections raised?
They had attorneys present, but you're not going to get a Q&A transcript. You're going to get people's notes, and those attorneys' notes, I can tell you that they will probably say that they were work product.
But there were no objections raised at the time on the record?
I don't know. I don't know because we were not told every person that was interviewed. We still don't know every person that was interviewed to date.
Question comes from Sonia McGee of CNN. Ms. McGee, your line is now open.
Hi, just getting back to the state trooper again. First of all, is she still assigned to protect the governor? And
Yes.
is she, and oh, she is. And as you know, what is
Yes.
being done to protect her and others who have spoken out with these claims against the governor against potential retaliation? And then, my other question just about your, sort of log of the day of the executive assistant. Is it possible that the executive assistant could have come on another day that just wasn't reflected in the log? What is the mechanism used to log people coming and going from the executive mansion?
So yeah, let me hit the trooper question. I don't know currently now since the report was released, but what I can tell you is up until a day or two before the report, the trooper was working. And I would also add that the governor has a view of this particular trooper, that's positive in terms of her job and day to day. With respect to what's being done about, retaliation, look, the whole world is watching right now. People are not going to be retaliated against by Governor Cuomo. But what we have to be able to do is examine evidence and be able to make a case for our client. Otherwise, to the extent that the assembly wants to move forward, to the extent they want to move forward with impeachment, you now have an impossible standard for us because we're not given access to the evidence. Now, I understand records have been provided to the assembly. We have asked them for that so that we can make an informed submission that adequately addresses the evidence and can point out areas where we believe there's been omissions or exculpatory evidence. I do also want to make another point on this, is that there are points in the report that talk about other chamber employees that believed a complainant. I do know and have been told by some other attorneys that they provided information that undermined the credibility of at least one complainant and questioned the motives. And somehow none of that made it in the report.
Well, I'm
And-
sorry,
and
Rita. I mean,
And finally, with respect, I'm sorry, I left out one other point. You asked, could it be another day in November? Because this assistant said it happened in November. We have looked at the records of visits to the mansion, and we did not find another day in November. We're not aware of another day in November other than the 16th that she was there.
but
And
I'm
I would
sorry,
note,
your personal attorney for the governor, are you saying to me right now that you do not know whether or not one of the women who has accused the governor, who is, presumably still part of his protective detail, you don't know if she's still near him every day on a day-to-day basis? Because I have reporting that she is no longer on his protective detail. And I just want to know, was she moved because was it her request? Was it the governor's request?
I actually don't know. What you're telling me right now, I didn't know. That's new news, and I actually can talk to my client about it. I do know that shortly before the report, she was still on the detail. I haven't gotten any current information in the last several days, so I don't know.
Your next question comes from Luis Ferrer of the New York Times. Mr. Ferrer, your line is now open.
Hi there. So I have two questions. One is that the report has a footnote that says that the executive assistant number one didn't remember the exact date that the incident happened, but that it was around when she took a photograph on November 16. I just wanted to ask what you made of that. And secondly, what happens after you submit your evidence to the Assembly's Judiciary Committee? Is there some sort of process laid out before the Assembly considers drafting articles of impeachment in which, the governor or the executive member gets to testify before the committee or its investigators or anything along those lines?
Yep. Let me take the first question. In that particular footnote of the report, what the investigators said is that they were able to pinpoint what day it was because the assistant had said that her task at the mansion was to photograph a document while she was there. And so they were able to locate the photograph and that photograph was dated November 16th. And the mansion records reflect that that was the day she was there for 3 hours. And we have not seen evidence of another day in November that she was at the mansion. Second, with respect to the assembly process, I certainly hope there is a process because we did not get that process in this report. We didn't get any process in the report. And so I think that the Assembly Judiciary Committee, they have said that they would do their own review. And I do know that Mr. Hastie had said that they may not just take the report at face value. Well, they shouldn't, because there are things that are omitted and there are things that just we believe are wrong. And that's why this needs to have a fuller and fairer process that has not been provided to the governor.
Your
Thank
next
you all
question
very
comes
much.
from-
Thank you.
All right, we'll take
Do
one more. Yeah.
Your next question comes from Jennifer Andrus of WNYT TV. Ms. Andrus, your line is now open. You're going to mute your microphone, Ms. Andrus.
Okay, that should be better. And clearly, this is not Jennifer Andrus. My name is Dan Levy. I am with News Channel 13. And thank you for the opportunity here. Over the last 5 months, since the investigation began, many people were willing to give the governor the benefit of the doubt. But since the Attorney General's report was released earlier this week, it seems that clearly much of that support has dried up. And many of the lawmakers who would serve as jurors, should there be a trial, have already released public statements critical of the governor's behavior. So how do you overcome something like that? How concerned are you?
I think it is always concerning when people announce where they're coming out before they have all the facts. You can't prejudge this. And I am guessing that members of the Assembly and the Senate did not know some of the things that we've shared today. And I hope that would give them pause as jurors. Look, my experience, I'm a trial lawyer. I've tried a lot of cases in front of juries. And the reason I love what I do and the process around it is because I love the rule of law. Because you get to tell both sides. When a witness says that someone did something, I get to ask them questions and cross-examine them. That has not happened here. And for the majority of the witnesses that were interviewed, they were not transcribed. The governor deserves to be treated fairly, like anybody else in this country accused of something. He is 63 years old. He has spent 40 years in public life. And for him to all of a sudden be accused of a sexual assault of an executive assistant that he really doesn't know doesn't pass muster. He needs to be treated fairly. And this would become, if you accept this report as is, without giving him the evidence, I tell you that is an irresponsible and a new standard for impeachment. Thank you, everybody.